My entire world changed the morning I received an invitation that should never have existed, because the family who once celebrated my humiliation suddenly wanted me to witness the lavish wedding of the man who had destroyed our marriage. They believed I was living somewhere in quiet defeat with nothing left except painful memories, but they had no idea that the woman they abandoned had spent the last 5 years building a life far greater than anything they could ever imagine. My name is Claire Brooks, and there was a time when I believed love could overcome pride, money, and family expectations until I married Ryan Caldwell and discovered that wealth often hides the darkest forms of cruelty. His powerful relatives never accepted me because I came from an ordinary background, and no matter how hard I worked to earn their respect, they treated me like someone who had wandered into a world where I did not belong. The breaking point came when I discovered Ryan had been carrying on a secret relationship with another woman, while convincing everyone that our marriage was falling apart because I was too ambitious and difficult to understand. I quietly packed my belongings before sunrise without telling anyone that I was carrying the greatest secret of all, because I had just learned that I was expecting children and refused to let his controlling family claim them as trophies while pushing me out of their lives. Starting over felt impossible during those first difficult months because I had no fortune, no influential relatives, and no one willing to fight my battles except myself. Yet every obstacle only strengthened my determination to succeed. I launched a small branding company from a tiny apartment while raising my children with endless sleepless nights, and over the years that little business transformed into a respected international agency that gave me financial freedom beyond anything the Caldwell family ever expected. On the afternoon I opened the elegant wedding invitation, my 4-year-old triplets, Liam, Owen, and Carter, were laughing together across the living room as sunlight poured through the windows and illuminated the silver blue eyes they had inherited from their father without ever knowing his name. I looked at my boys, folded the invitation carefully, and realized destiny had quietly placed every piece exactly where it belonged, because the people preparing to laugh at my downfall were about to come face to face with the future they had unknowingly abandoned. The following morning I placed the invitation on my office desk while my executive assistant, Victoria Hayes, reviewed our schedule, and the moment she recognized the sender, she looked at me with a mixture of concern and disbelief. Because she knew everything I had survived, she quietly suggested that ignoring the event would probably be the wiser decision, but I simply smiled and explained that sometimes the strongest answer to years of disrespect was not revenge through anger but confidence built by success. Later that afternoon, another message appeared on my phone from an unknown number reminding me that the wedding required formal attire and respectable behavior, and I instantly recognized the familiar tone hidden behind those carefully chosen words. Whoever sent the message expected me to feel intimidated, yet all it accomplished was convincing me that the Caldwell family still believed they controlled the story even though they had completely lost that privilege years earlier. Instead of wasting another moment thinking about their opinions, I called my favorite designer and ordered 3 perfectly tailored midnight blue suits for my sons along with an elegant sapphire evening gown that reflected everything I had become through years of determination and sacrifice. My boys laughed excitedly while trying on their tiny jackets, and watching them admire themselves in the mirror filled my heart with pride because they had grown into kind, confident children despite never having the advantages of the wealthy family that had rejected them before birth. The evening before the ceremony, I gathered Liam, Owen, and Carter around the dining table, and gently explained that we were going to attend a special event where they would meet someone connected to our family history for the very first time. They listened with curious expressions before asking innocent questions about the father they had never known, and although my heart felt heavy, I assured them that every answer would come when the right moment arrived and that no matter what happened they would always be deeply loved. As I stood alone on my balcony later that night overlooking the sparkling skyline, I realized I no longer feared returning to the place where my life had once fallen apart because I was not the same frightened woman who had walked away with nothing except hope. Tomorrow, I would walk into that grand estate with my head held high beside the 3 greatest blessings of my life, and before the celebration ended, the carefully protected image of the Caldwell family would begin to crumble in front of everyone they had spent decades trying to impress. The afternoon of the wedding arrived beneath bright blue skies, and our convoy of polished black luxury vehicles slowly climbed the winding driveway leading to the historic Caldwell estate where hundreds of influential guests had already gathered for the celebration. uniformed attendants immediately assumed we were important business executives because of the elegant vehicles, but their expressions changed the instant they recognized my name on the guest list and remembered the woman they believed had disappeared from their world forever. When I stepped onto the stone courtyard wearing my sapphire gown, every conversation around us gradually faded into complete silence because nobody expected the forgotten former wife to arrive looking calm, successful, and completely unshaken by the past. My sons climbed out beside me in their matching tailored suits, and countless guests stared at the three boys whose striking silver blue eyes and familiar smiles seemed to awaken memories that many people wished had remained buried forever. Inside the beautifully decorated garden pavilion, I noticed Ryan standing near the altar greeting guests with practiced confidence until his eyes suddenly met mine across the crowd, and the color immediately drained from his face, as though every secret he had ever hidden rushed back at once. His fiancée, Madison Harper, smiled politely at arriving visitors without understanding why whispers were spreading through the audience or why so many curious eyes had shifted away from the wedding decorations and toward the children standing beside me. Before anyone could approach us, Ryan's mother, Judith Caldwell, hurried across the marble walkway wearing an expressive smile that failed to hide the anger burning behind her eyes, and she quietly informed me that my assigned seat was near the back of the ceremony because she believed that was the only place someone like me belonged. I returned her smile without raising my voice and calmly replied that I preferred sitting wherever my children felt comfortable because respect was something I earned long ago rather than something her family could decide to grant or withhold. Without waiting for permission, I guided Liam, Owen, and Carter to a row near the front where they admired the flowers and stained glass decorations with innocent excitement, completely unaware that their presence alone had already shaken the carefully planned celebration. As I settled into my seat, I noticed Ryan staring at the boys with growing confusion while Judith nervously avoided looking in their direction, and deep inside I knew the truth was only moments away from changing. Every life gathered beneath that elegant wedding tent. Soft music drifted through the garden as the ceremony officially began, and every guest rose to welcome Madison as she walked gracefully toward the altar with a smile that reflected dreams of a perfect future she believed was waiting for her. Within moments, however, her joyful expression slowly faded because the attention of nearly everyone had shifted away from the bride and toward the three young boys sitting only a few rows from the front beside a woman many of the guests suddenly remembered. Ryan struggled to focus on the vows as his eyes repeatedly wandered toward my sons, and every familiar expression they made seemed to awaken memories he could not explain no matter how hard he tried. When Carter tilted his head while listening to the music and Liam folded his arms exactly the way Ryan always did during serious moments, several older relatives exchanged nervous glances because the resemblance had become impossible to ignore. The fragile silence finally shattered when Owen leaned close to me and whispered in his cheerful little voice that he was getting hungry and wondered if weddings always lasted this long, causing a few nearby guests to laugh before the sound quickly faded into uncomfortable silence. Ryan looked directly at me with trembling eyes, filled with confusion, and for the first time since I arrived, I saw genuine fear replacing the confidence he had worn like a carefully polished mask. Judith suddenly stood from her seat and demanded that security escort us away before the ceremony continued, insisting that I had come only to create unnecessary drama during an important family celebration. I calmly rose to my feet, looked directly at Ryan instead of his mother, and asked one simple question that echoed through the silent pavilion by wondering whether he truly intended to throw three innocent children into the street without even asking why they looked so much like him. Before Ryan could answer, an elderly family friend named Dr. Samuel Preston slowly stepped forward after quietly studying the boys for several minutes, and he explained that he had known the Caldwell family for decades because he had served as their physician through multiple generations. With remarkable certainty, he pointed out that the unusual silver blue eyes carried by all three children were an exceptionally rare hereditary trait found only within the Caldwell bloodline, and the moment those words reached the crowd, the celebration dissolved into stunned silence as every carefully hidden secret began rising to the surface. A wave of shocked whispers swept through the wedding pavilion as every guest turned from the altar toward my children, and the elegant ceremony that had been planned for months suddenly became a room filled with confusion, disbelief, and unanswered questions. Madison slowly lowered her bouquet while staring at Ryan with tears forming in her eyes, and she quietly asked him whether the boys standing only a few feet away were truly connected to him because the resemblance was impossible for anyone to deny. Ryan stood completely frozen as though time itself had stopped around him, and I could see years of regret, guilt, and painful memories crashing into him all at once while he struggled to find words that simply refused to come. Finally, he walked a few hesitant steps toward me and asked in a trembling voice if there was something I had never told him before we separated, and the entire gathering waited in absolute silence for my answer. I looked directly into his eyes and calmly explained that I had discovered I was expecting children only days before leaving his family behind, but I chose to disappear because his affair and his mother's constant cruelty convinced me that my babies deserved a peaceful life far away from their influence. I reminded him that while he was building a future with someone else, I was attending doctor appointments alone, surviving sleepless nights, growing a struggling business into a successful company, and raising 3 wonderful boys without asking anyone from the Caldwell family for a single dollar. Judith stepped forward in anger and accused me of hiding the children to manipulate the family, but before she could continue, Madison interrupted her with tears running down her face and demanded to know why everyone seemed more interested in protecting family pride than telling the truth. Without another word, Madison removed her engagement ring, placed it gently into Ryan's shaking hand, and walked away from the altar with her parents following closely behind, leaving hundreds of stunned guests watching the once perfect wedding collapse before their eyes. I gathered Liam, Owen, and Carter beside me and quietly told them it was time to leave because they had already seen enough sadness for one day, and the 3 boys obediently reached for my hands without fully understanding why so many adults around them were crying. As we walked toward the waiting cars, I heard Ryan calling my name from behind with desperation I had never heard before, and although I did not stop walking, I knew this was only the beginning because the greatest battle was no longer about the past but about what kind of father he would choose to become in the future. Several weeks later, Ryan arrived at my Manhattan penthouse carrying a few simple gifts instead of expensive presents, because he had finally realized that children remember time, kindness, and laughter far longer than they remember the price of anything placed inside a gift bag. The boys greeted him with cautious curiosity, and although they still called him Mr. Ryan instead of Dad, they happily invited him to join them on the living room floor where toy trains, building blocks, and coloring books quickly replaced every awkward moment between us. Watching him struggle to assemble a complicated toy castle while Liam patiently corrected his mistakes, Owen covered his sleeves with colorful paint, and Carter proudly declared himself the family engineer was a sight I never imagined I would witness after everything we had endured. The man who once relied on assistants and private staff to solve every inconvenience now laughed freely as 3 energetic little boys climbed onto his shoulders, proving that genuine parenthood could never be purchased with money or inherited through a famous last name. Meanwhile, Judith refused to accept the consequences of her own actions and remained isolated inside the enormous estate that had once symbolized power, prestige, and control over everyone around her. The same social circles that had once admired her quietly distanced themselves after the failed wedding and public family scandal, leaving her surrounded only by empty hallways, fading memories, and the painful realization that fear could never replace love. Months passed peacefully as Ryan continued visiting every weekend without ever breaking a promise, and little by little he earned the trust of the children through bedtime stories, school events, birthday celebrations, and countless ordinary moments that slowly healed wounds created years before they even understood what had happened. Looking out across Central Park one quiet evening, I realized that true victory had never been about humiliating the people who once hurt me, because the greatest success was creating a joyful life where their hatred no longer controlled my future or my happiness. As I closed my laptop and listened to the laughter of my children echo through the home we built together, I silently thanked every difficult chapter that had shaped me into the strong woman I had become, because none of those painful experiences had defeated me in the end. Please subscribe to our channel and share this video with your friends and family. We create entertaining and inspiring stories for our viewers, and your support helps us continue making great content for you.